Nabis, bringing colour and brightness into the everyday. The Nabis were a group of French painters who worked at the end of the 19th century. They were first active from 1888 and held their final collective exhibition in 1900. The name Nabis comes from the Hebrew for prophet. The group considered themselves as a modern prophet of painting and art. All the members of Le Nabis shared an interest in the work of Paul Gauguin and Paul Cézanne. Gauguin was particularly influential after Paul Cézanne visited him and created his first Nabis painting. Later on we will discuss this painting further, as it will be the focus for today's workshop. The underlying theme of their mantra was remember that a painting, before it is a horse in battle, a nude, or any sort of anecdote, is essentially a flat surface covered with colours assembled in a certain order. This concept of the surface and colour, rather than representation, can be seen running throughout modernism. This small, often forgotten movement was largely pivotal in the transition from early Impressionism to early movements of modernism. This can be seen as we transition from the Nabis to the emergence of Fauvists or Fauvism around 1904. Fauvists were colourists. They prioritised colour over the realistic value of the object, using the colour to express within their paintings rather than capture true representation. Famous artists that were Fauvists include André Derain and Henri Matisse. I recommend having a look at some Fauvist work after this workshop, and you will see how they took the palette of the Nabis and incorporated it into a new movement. The first Nabis painting, Le Bois d'Amour à Pont-Aven. As previously mentioned, the first Nabis painting was by Paul Cézanne. The painting was created under the guidance of Gauguin when Cézanne travelled to the artist colony in Pont-Aven during 1888. During his stay, Cézanne walked to the Bois d'Amour, a picturesque landscape, and discussed the colours that they saw. This resulted in a painting representing not the landscape but flat areas of colours, filling the sensations of the painter. When returning to Paris, some of his fellow painters were enthused by the new concept that Cézanne had learnt and dubbed the painting as Le Talisman, making it the emblem for their new movement. Our workshop for today will be to create our own transcription of a Nabis painting. A transcription is in essence our own copy of a work or a historical work. This is a very fun and interesting way to discover more about the work, and through this process we can begin to understand how the artist worked and actually created the piece. To join in, you will need some paper, oil pastels or paints if you don't have pastels, masking tape, pencil and a reference image. Before you start, find an image of a Nabis painting that you're going to choose to copy. So you want to start by masking out a rectangle on your page. I'm using a sketchbook that's a slightly off-white colour. This worked quite well for my painting, but just use what you have at home. Previously mentioned, you're going to want to already have selected your painting. Now I recommend to roughly sketch out your chosen artwork. You don't have to do this and you can go straight out with your media, but I do recommend this if you want to get something a bit closer to the original work. So once you've sketched everything out, you want to apply the image using your chosen media. I'm using oil pastels, and these are my favourites. They're by Snealia. The reason that I recommend oil pastels is they're a lot cleaner to work with than oil paint, but you'll still get some of the texture and the quality of the original painting. If you ever get the chance to use some artist quality oil pastels, I really recommend it. They're quite different to the kind of studio ones that you normally find in school and colleges. These blend a lot more. They're a lot more like using a paint rather than actually using a pastel. Something else I recommend doing is colour testing, which you'll see on that piece of paper there. I test out my colours and I'm trying to match the colour as closely as I can to the original painting, so I tend to sketch it out on a piece of paper first. I recommend to always have the original somewhere in front of you. I've actually got this balanced on my iPad so that I can be looking at the image and constantly referencing back to the image the whole time. It's not perfect, it's a study, but you get an essence of what the artist was doing and start to unpick what this painting was about and how it was put together. For me, I sort of approach this almost like a puzzle. So if you look at all the different colours and the tones and the areas, I approached each bit sort of almost individually and kind of mapped it to the rest of the area. So it was quite interesting because you can start to unpick the layers of paint that the artist put down. So I started to get an understanding that the ochres and the yellows, there was kind of a layer behind, so there must have been a ground, so a first layer of colour beforehand. And then you can see where the artist has layered colours on top of the ground and then on top of the colour that's on top of the ground. So the more you start working with the image, the more that you'll be able to unpick and understand exactly how the artist started to put the artwork together. Chosen to use oil pastels, as I recommended, you can actually just blend them together or make new colours by layering different colours on top of each other. This is something I really like about using oil pastels, because you still get a painterly effect and you're still able to mix and blend even though they're not actually paints. So it's all to do with the binders that are inside the pastels. So for instance, that yellow and that orange, I didn't have quite the right red, so I lay down the red and then I'm able to mix it by adding different yellows and oranges within it so that I can be closer to the original painting. So it's just something to experiment with, and you can always try it on a scrap of paper and just see if it's going to blend with the right colour, and also think about which colour you're putting down first and which one will be stronger. For instance, if I put a green then a yellow, the green's going to come through the yellow. Whereas if I put yellow and green, the yellow is going to be weaker underneath the green because the green is a stronger pigment. So there are things to sort of get to grips with, play with, and test out. personal note, the thing I keep rubbing my hands on is actually a baby wipe, because I like to blend material with my bare fingers rather than using something like a cotton bud. I know some people prefer cotton buds, but I prefer the kind of physical interaction with the medium. I can get it to do more exactly what I want it to do if I use my hand, because I can change the pressure and things like that and really move the oil paint around, the oil pastel around. So that's what I'm doing, and I tend to just keep wiping my hands to try and keep them nice and clean. Side note to that, sometimes I forget and you'll see that I muddy some of my colours where I forgot to wipe my hands, and I've made some of my yellows slightly more brown and things like that. Some of it does come from the pastels not being 100% clean, so do wipe them off on the paper and things like that as you're working. But you will see sometimes I accidentally muddy my colours, but it happens, we forget things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why transcriptions can be a really, really good thing. Transcriptions allow you to learn in a different way. They allow you to learn from other artists. And I think quite often that people think copying something is like a really bad thing. It's not if it's a transcription, because you're making it sort of partially your own, but you're also using it as a tool for learning. And this is where it's different. It's not like I'm copying this artwork and then claiming it as a completely original thought. I'm saying this is a transcription from this painting. This is Le Talisman. This is me learning from Le Talisman and learning about how those paints were applied and how this piece is put together. It's not me saying it's mine. And I think that's a really big difference. But I also think it's a really good thing to do, because I learned so much from this. Night at that kind of talk about transcriptions. If there's a piece out there that really interests you or inspires you, and you want to sort of try out some of the techniques or try and transcribe it and make it your own, then go and do that. There's, nothing stopping you. Just credit something's origins. And you can actually do transcriptions where you might look at this painting, for instance, and turn it into a sculpture. This is where it kind of becomes more of your own thing. It's kind of more inspiration from, rather than a direct transcription. So go out there, have fun, and there is just so much that you can do with this kind of technique. fun giving it a go yourself and creating your own Nabis transcription. So bat away some of those January blues and enjoy brightness of colour inside your home.